Okay, hi everybody. Welcome. Welcome to the Center for Imagination building. We're so pleased to have you here. Welcome to our very special guests who will all be introduced by various people. My name is Jamie Williams. I'm the director of the Center for Imagination. This is a beautiful new building that we have, but more than a building, it's an idea. The Center for Imagination seeks to encourage our students, our staff, and indeed our whole community to come together to pursue interdisciplinary projects, creative projects, and things that really spark our imagination, that really move us and motivate us to discover our own grand passions in life. So we're so pleased to have you here today. It's a special day for us because it really marks our first event that we've been able to hold with external people. So we're so glad that you're here. Thank you for joining us. Without further ado, I'd like to ask our principal, Dr. Craig Cook, to come up and introduce the Nae Disha Project.
Thank you so much, Jamie, and wonderful to be with you all here. And as Jamie said, it's a space here, the Center for Imagination, that really is about integration, bringing things together. And so we're privileged to have some special guests today as we really inaugurate our first public event. Nae Disha New Pathways is a 4-month-long community-based youth resilience and mental health intervention development program created by Bronze, which is a community health initiative of Herbertpur Christian Hospital, one of the Emmanuel Hospital Association hospitals. Woodstock School, and particularly Mrs. Sanjay Mark, our Director of Community Engagement, and our chaplain, and myself are on the advisory committee for Nae Disha. And this has been key, of course, in navigating the rollout of Nae Disha among schools locally, among adolescents during the COVID-19 pandemic. Today, the Bronze team is here to share their findings for implementing Nae Disha in the middle of the COVID pandemic and the learnings for implementation of a youth resilience intervention in a high viral transmission context. So it's a pleasure to have our guest with us today. And next, I would like to introduce our Director of Community Engagement and our chaplain, Mrs. Sanjay Mark, to introduce more of our special guests. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Cook. Thank you, Jamie. It's a real pleasure for us to have Mr. Nathan Grills here. Professor Nathan Grills is a public health physician at the Nozzle Institute of Global Health, University of Melbourne. He researches public health and disability, largely in the context of community settings in India. He established a number of community health and development projects in rural India and has visited India 65 times. He completed his doctorate in Public Health at the Oxford University. In addition to this, he is a really good friend of Woodstock, and especially for the community community outreach program at Woodstock. He founded the Samvedna project, and through this project at Village Dhana, they have an intervention center for children who are moderately to severely disabled physically and mentally. And Woodstock has been collaborating with Samvedna, which incidentally is celebrating its 12th anniversary. But because we couldn't celebrate the 10th anniversary over the pandemic, it's being called the 10th anniversary tomorrow. And we would like to thank especially Samvedna and Mr. Nathan Grills for the opportunity that Samvedna has given Woodstock school students to engage actively and deeply in community development work. And just the quality work that is done there, I'd like to encourage everyone to go and see this center. The quality work, the beautiful playground, the beautiful resources that have been set up in a village that is quite far removed from any big city. Thank you for that. At this time, I also would like to give a big welcome to Mr. Kamod Sharma. Mr. Kamod Sharma is our Cluster Resource Center Coordinator, Mussoorie Education Department. Thank you for being here. Woodstock also appreciates all your support to the school. We're also delighted to have Mr. Abhishek Kesar, Principal from Oak Grove School here. Thank you for being here. And a very, very warm welcome, especially to the Buras team and all our guests who are here to support the Buras team. Welcome to all of you. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Sanjaya, for that very kind welcome. And also want to acknowledge the guests here as well. Thank you for joining us today, particularly Mr. Sharma and Mr. Kasev. But also to acknowledge Michael Wesley, Deputy Vice Chancellor International from Melbourne University. Thank you for coming across here and being a part of this event. I think what I've really enjoyed about working with Burans and with Woodstock is the importance of partnerships. Partnerships have been a key in what we've done in Burans project and in the community health and Samvedna projects. And Burans is a partnership project in mental health and has been since 2014. And that was a partnership with the Uttarakhand Global Health Network. A lot of innovation and implementation and research outputs that Burans has delivered have been through really important partnerships. Together is better is the motto of the Uttarakhand cluster. And I think Burans has shown us that we can do far more together. Some of the partners I want to acknowledge as well, obviously the University of Melbourne in the current project that we're talking about today, have been involved in that project, but also since the start of Burans in 2014. Melbourne University was one of the founding members, including my role with that. And a number of University of Melbourne academics have been involved in both research and training right through the last 8 years. I guess next year is your 10th anniversary to celebrate that. Michelle Commode, Greg Armstrong, Nicole Bishop, a number of our researchers have visited and done short projects and long projects and a lot of research outputs as well, which is our university cares about. But what I really like about it isn't just research for research's sake. The outputs that we've done through Burans have had an impact. I think this research is a good example of that. It's not an academic, esoteric exercise. It's research that impacts. It's research that changes lives. And I really look forward to hearing from some of the lives that have been touched by this project later on. That'll be the highlight for me. So welcome to, I've forgotten their names, Sushma, was it? The three girls? Sakshi. Yeah, Sakshi and Nikita. Welcome. And I look forward to hearing some of your journey as well later on. So Nae Disha is in the school's project was a follow-on from Nae Disha in other settings, in youth settings and in community settings. But we thought, how would this Nae Disha mental health resilience course, how would it look in a school setting? And that's when we started working with Woodstock and other school principals to look at how that could actually be implemented in a school setting. But from University of Melbourne's point of view, how do we actually make sure that what we're doing is research-based and shows, and we can measure the impact of that course in the schools? So that was the background. To thank the funding agencies that have supported this project, University of Oxford and the University of Melbourne, Chancellor International, University of Melbourne. And a special thanks to Premila Webster, who I think is online, calling in from Oxford at 6 a.m. in the morning. She was really important in brokering relationship with the Oxford Sustainability Institute, which has supported this work. So welcome, thank you Premila, and welcome Premila if you're able to join us. I hope you are with us, I think you are. It's been a very difficult journey though, a very different journey to what we planned, I think in 2020. This project was initiated and funded in January and February 2020. In the good old days, that were the days. Very different now, but I think why it's been even more important is mental health amongst school children has been even more dire and more challenging in the last 2 years. I know that Woodstock and teachers here and other teachers from other schools in this area who have joined us today, that you're aware of the mental health impact on students due to the pandemic and the added stress that has brought to your students. So this program is even more important, I think, to see how can we build resilience amongst school students, what are the different modules and different ways we can do that, how can we actually show that it works so that we can actually disseminate it and use it in other settings. And that's the idea of today's session, is to disseminate the learnings and see how we could use some of these learnings in your settings or other settings around both this state and other places in India. We've also worked with the Department of Empowerment of People with Disabilities, particularly around the dissemination of this work. So that's a department under the Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment. And the idea was that they would look at having this curriculum as part of some of their disability school projects. So the former secretary is Secretary Shakuntala Gamlin, and to thank her for her involvement. She retired at the start of last year. She's coming tomorrow. She'll be chief guest at celebrating the 10-year celebration for Samvedna tomorrow. So some of you will meet her tomorrow, but she couldn't come today. She had other engagements today. And to thank the advisory committee from the schools, a number of you on the advisory committee, the idea was very much about the research findings and the effectiveness of this tool. How could we use it elsewhere? And having the schools engaged in the advisory process right through and then in the dissemination is a really important part of that. So I think that's all I want to say. Just to say again, thank you for Woodstock for hosting us today. They've been a really important partner in this project and other projects, as Sanjaya has suggested. So we look forward to continuing that partnership, and I'm sure that Woodstock will be helping us to disseminate these results and see how some of these learnings could be used in the settings in this school, but also across other schools in this state and elsewhere. I know the number of the mental health or the counselling department from Woodstock here today as well. I'm not sure if they're hiding. Oh, Bino's up there. Yep. So it's great that we can work with your staff as well to see how some of these findings and learnings could be integrated or incorporated in the current programs you run at Woodstock. So we look forward to hearing a bit more about the program from Pooja. Pooja's been leading operations for Bull Runs for the last, how many years? 2 years. And to acknowledge Karan Matthias, who set up Bull Runs in 2014, and she is from New Zealand and she's based in New Zealand, but she speaks Hindi better than most locals here. Karen grew up here and she would have loved to have been here, but pandemic has meant that she's not able to be here right now. But she sends her regards, and I'm sure Pooja will mention something from Karen as well. But again, welcome Karen, I know you're online, so we'll take other people as well. Have any questions online or comments, please post them. I will curate the posts and the questions, and I'll curate those to the audience after Pooja's described more about the program. So thank you for Pooja for your leadership in this program and leading the research. She's been with Bull Runs for nearly 7 years, and she's been the key part of the Bull Runs program since we started it a long time ago. And I'm sure that I know that other things are in store for you in the future, and we wish you all the best in your work post Bull Runs as well. Thanks, Pooja.
Thank you so much, Nathan. I think I might have to lower this. I'm vertically challenged. So anyway, good evening, everyone. My name is Pooja Pillay, as Nathan mentioned. I'm working with Burans currently, and I have been for the last 7 years. We are here to talk about Nae Disha today, and along with me we have a couple of team members, Atul Singh and Pooja Bhatt, who are both coaches for Nae Disha as well as field officers working in the communities in Dehradun. We also have, as Nathan mentioned, 3 young people here who are participants in Nae Disha. And later on during the presentation, they will be sharing their own experiences being a part of Nae Disha program. So just a brief introduction about Burans. We work in Dehradun district as well as the Uttarkashi district. In Dehradun, we predominantly work in urban and peri-urban areas, while in Uttarkashi, we work in a more remote rural setup. So in 2020, we had actually planned to do the Nae Disha program among school-going young people within the school setup. So that didn't happen, big surprise. And we then worked with the advisory group and decided to do something a little different, but along the same lines. So to give a brief introduction of what Nae Disha is, it's a 4-month-long community-based youth mental health and resilience intervention. It was developed by Burans, a community mental health organization, which is an initiative of Herbertpur Christian Hospital, which is a part of the umbrella of hospitals under EHA, Emmanuel Hospital Association. We were supported by the University of Melbourne, the CHGN Uttarakhand Cluster, and the Australian India Institute as well. Nae Disha this year, this iteration of it, it's the 3rd edition of the manual itself. We started working on Nae Disha in 2014, and some of the sessions that are there, that are a part of Nae Disha, are sessions on character strengths, coping with tension, sexual and reproductive health, gender-based violence and mental health. We also look at tension, difficult behavior and bullying as some of the modules that are part of Nae Disha. And one of the key learnings for us over the years, running Nae Disha in the communities in different forms as a randomized controlled trial and as a pilot program in the communities, we realized that building relationships in the communities is really key to increasing participation in Nae Disha. And during the pandemic, we realized that young people definitely needed sessions like this, which were more structured. So previous iterations of Nae Disha, actually, we've published about 3 papers by now. One is on the very first pilot program that we conducted, and then we did a larger program with about 120 young people, which was led by Prerna, who's also joining us here today. And 2 papers we did on realist evaluation of that pilot intervention, as well as an outcome study as well. So these were the research outputs from the previous iterations of Nae Disha that we conducted in the communities. All of these were in communities, and the very first iteration was among only dropout young women from the communities. So let's talk about the context. So we all know there was the pandemic, there was a lockdown, and one of the first structures to be affected by the lockdown was the schooling and learning systems. And low-income private and government schools completely shut down. There were no e-learning solutions, and it became a huge issue where a lot of young people were staying at home. They did not have the routine of going to school, and that affected their mental health quite negatively. And we are also looking at a context where there is already a lot of intersectional disadvantage, because we were working predominantly in the slums in Dehradun, and it was sort of the peak of the first wave of COVID, when September to December is when we actually implemented Nae Disha, and that was just after the first wave finished, and slowly we were allowed to gather again, because there was a time when we weren't allowed to meet more than 4 people at a time. So that's what the context was to start with. And when we started thinking of actually changing the program and running it in the communities and not in the schools, we also had to change our approach to the program. So initially, there was no COVID safety protocols back then. So we set up COVID safety protocols. We hired more rooms in the communities so that we could have safe spaces, safe controllable spaces, where we could have young people meet of course socially distanced with masks, and we could have our sessions there. We also changed our training formats. We used to have a lot of trainings face to face. We had residential trainings before, but we moved our trainings to more online sessions. We started WhatsApp groups to be able to chat with the facilitators so that we could actually have communication going on despite the challenge of meeting face to face. We also, working in the communities, found out that there was already increased anxiety and depression during the pandemic, and there was also a paper released on this by Porter. So the participants of Nae Disha, okay, this of course is a research study, but the whole goal of it was to implement this in the community and have a useful impact happening in the community. So instead of about 18 young people per group, which was what was originally done in Nae Disha, we had only 8 to 10 adolescents in a group, and we selected young people who were going to the same government school. So we recruited them, community workers recruited them door to door and also used snowballing. So one young person knew other young people in the community going to the same school, and therefore the groups were formed. 440 young people participated in the Nae Disha sessions, which is a huge number of people. Keep in mind, this is not a randomized controlled trial where we need hundreds, but we had such high interest from the communities. We were hitting almost 450, and we had to actually hold back because we didn't have enough facilitators. Young people, I think Pooja Bhatt is here, young people used to communicate and contact us saying, can we please join? There was so much interest in the communities, but we didn't have the resources to actually fulfill the need in the community, so we held back there. We had 11 boys groups and 32 girls groups of Nae Disha participants in the community. Interesting numbers, I know, 11 boys, 32 girls. What happened was that a lot of the young men actually decided to seek informal employment during the break from school, but most of the young women were confined to their own homes, and this was a great opportunity for them to actually come out and participate in something different and more structured. In the beginning, as we thought of implementing this program in schools, but also school-going young people in the community, we formed an advisory group. Woodstock, that Mrs. Sanjaya and Dr. Craig were also part of the advisory group. The group is still alive. So we met with a lot of school principals and teachers to discuss the best ways to keep engaging with young people, especially in the context where they're not going to school. And we got some really useful information, and we are still looking at further engagement with more schools and young people as well. After running Nae Disha program in the community, before and after, we collected quantitative data as well as qualitative data to guide our research goal, so to speak. We collected information on some psychometric measures. We used the pre-post uncontrolled design. We used PHQ-9, which is a measure of depression, GAD-7, a measure of anxiety, CD-RISK, which is a measure of resilience, a general self-efficacy tool, and a gender equal attitudes tool as well. We used paper-based forms. We collected socio-demographic data as well that would inform the setting a lot better. We asked questions about caste, religion, marital status, and housing quality, and also highest education obtained by parents and indebtedness. And this was from the ICF International Demographic and Health Survey. Qualitative data, which was collected, was through focus group discussions and semi-structured interviews. We collected data from 79 participants. Thankfully, we had a research assistant who was able to work through a lot of this data collection. We had attendance data, homework completion data. We did a lot of observations and note-taking. We had some field notes, but there's a table there that sort of describes all the data that we collected. So facilitators, adolescents, parents of young people, the community-based volunteers. These were all people we collected data from for the qualitative side of our research. Then data analysis was again done in two phases. There was the quantitative data analysis, which was done using SPSS. We did a t-test for checking for statistical significance. We also did transcription and translation of the interviews. and we analyzed the data for meta themes and used thematic analysis. So here is an example, as a pointer, yeah. Here's an example of how we actually arrived at the different themes from the data. So we have our original text, which is quite long, as you can see, and then that was compressed into codes. The codes were then sort of compressed into an interim theme, and we arrived at a final theme. In this case, that the group platform of Nae Disha triggered peer friendships. And this is how we went about the entire coding process throughout the data analysis phase. So, results. So, we looked at results in 3 different ways. We looked at the results in terms of the context, the mechanisms, and the outcomes. The context was already set in a way, but the collection of sociodemographic data facilitated a more clear picture of what the context looks like in the specific area we are working in and the target population we are working with. We do have a disadvantaged or oppressed caste working with us, that's about 28%, and more than 43% of the people we worked with live in semi-permanent structures within the urban slums in Dehradun. There's very low literacy with more than 80% fathers and more than 90% of mothers who hadn't completed class 8, which is primary education. And more than 42% of the participants were also from a minority religious group. So we have oppressed caste, low literacy, and a minority religious group. And more than 36% of participants had taken a loan for health and household expenses in the last year. So this gives a picture of the level of intersectional disadvantage that we are dealing with in the communities that we are working in. And then when we looked at the mechanisms that supported participation, there were 3 key things that really stood out during our work with the current Nae Disha iteration. There's a small outcome story, but I won't go into details in that because we'll hear right from the young people later on. One thing we noticed is that having local facilitators using a horizontal approach supported participation by young people. So in our groups, we didn't have ma'ams, we didn't have sirs, we had Didi, we had Bhaiya. And we had facilitators who were very willing to learn and in a lot of cases accept that they don't know answers to all the questions. And that really helped young people open up and ask more questions without feeling any hesitation or fear. We also found out that sequencing and incrementally confronting content was increasingly acceptable. Again, we are working in communities where topics such as sexual and reproductive health are considered taboo to an extent. Considering those challenges, those confronting topics were kept towards the end of the module. So the initial modules were lighter content based on relationship building and sort of setting rules and forming an environment, a safe space for young people to talk. And then we moved on to increasingly confronting topics such as bullying and mental health and sexual and reproductive health. The session format and group platform also triggered peer friendships. Again, as a horizontal approach, we would always sit in a group on the floor in a safe space, which is why we rented a different room because there was too much commotion happening in the communities. And these safe spaces and the group platform triggered peer friendships. We had a lot of group activities, games, and a lot of engaging content within the modules, which definitely helped trigger friendships as well. So the results, the outcome parts of the results. So we found that young people experienced increased confidence, self-esteem, and acceptance of self and others. And we're talking about, again, young people who are from communities and they are now able to talk in the open in front of a big crowd. We had a talent show at the end of one of our sessions. It was around Women's Day. And young people were so happy to actually participate and do solo events, which was a huge leap from where they were in the beginning when they were very shy and hesitant to do any kind of things in public. We also saw some outcomes linked to gender transformation and sexual and reproductive health. And a lot of content included learning about good touch and bad touch, learning about your own body. This was content that was initially considered difficult, especially by parents of young women. But the community workers managed to actually talk to the parents and talk about the content and discuss in what ways we can make this content less confronting. And the young people learned quite a bit. And there are stories where young people have gone back and spoken to parents at home and talked about everything that they've learned, passing on information to others in the community as well. In the quantitative scores, we saw some interesting things. The mental health scores, especially PHQ-9 and generalized anxiety disorder scale, saw a statistically significant difference, meaning that mental health improved over the months when we ran Nae Disha. We also saw the resilience score also improved significantly. We did not see a big improvement in the gender equal attitude scale and self-efficacy test. We are wondering why, but we also know that there is possibility that the mental health scores have improved because increasingly the lockdowns were being lifted. There was easing in the restrictions due to COVID. And additionally, we think that it takes longer engagement to bring about change in something so structurally ingrained such as gender attitude and general self-efficacy. So these were some of our observations. Methodological considerations, the researchers such as myself and Karen, who were supervising at a higher level, we were part of the implementation process as well. Being operations lead, I was involved in the implementation process. So there was space for some social desirability bias, but at the same time, I think we were more aware of the context and we were able to see some things a lot clearer than if we were removed from the scenario. And our current evaluation, although we did this with 440 young people, we did not have a control group. And the context kept changing throughout the study, with the lockdowns being lifted in between. Some schools started opening again, especially for class 10 and class 12 board exam students. So that also impacted our study to some extent. We had some critical reflections, of course, and we realized that infection control and having alternate protocols to account for a pandemic was really important in implementing during the pandemic. So hiring new rooms, following safety protocols, actually investing in getting hand sanitizers and hand washes and masks, and making sure that everybody follows rules. Like if you have a temperature, stay at home, you walk in, socially distanced. All these things were key parts of our implementation. And there is great value in the pre-existing relationships in the communities, and we've observed even in our previous implementations of Nae Disha that relationship building in the communities is really key in building trust, especially among parents of young women. And where the relationship existed, parents were more than happy to send the young women to the Nae Disha program. And Pooja Bhatt, again, who's running in one of our community centers, she was talking about how young women had to be escorted from their homes by community health workers and taken back home. But this was not the same case for young men. They were happy, parents were happy to send them along by themselves and back. And we did have a couple of funny incidences when young men went and started playing cricket elsewhere, saying that we are going for the Nae Disha program, and then we had to find them. And we looked at ways to integrate some kind of more engaging games in the program to pique interest. We also found out that, we found that having a structured program, although horizontal, something like Nae Disha, was really important in the context of the lockdown. More than anything, I think young people missed the routine of going to school, getting up, having a routine, going to school, coming back, meeting with their peers. So this Nae Disha was a good structured program to sort of, I wouldn't say substitute, but at least to buttress existing peer groups. And some young women were meeting their peers after months of lockdown, and they were quite happy to be able to be in a group where they can meet with each other. We did have some challenges with regard to the geographic area where people had to walk for an hour, but a lot of the young people were very happy to be included in this, so they did not mind the walk, but it was still challenging because it's about an hour and a half walk to get to the center where the the session is taking place and then the walk back, and it was challenging for both the young people and the community health workers escorting them. We also had some gender relations challenges, as I mentioned, with a lot of young women not being allowed to leave their homes, and the community health workers, the facilitators, having to navigate that specifically by building relationships and trusts with the parents. That is a quick summary of all that we did in the last couple of years, especially in 2020. If you have any questions, I think we also have some questions I don't know if we have any questions in the live chat, but if there are any questions in the live chat, Nathan, please let me know. Otherwise, we are open to any questions anyone might have, or if I was not clear about anything. Yes.
Thank you, Pooja. It was a really interesting presentation, but I was really interested in the results, particularly the gender attitude.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm reading that correctly, did that result get a little bit worse, or is that just slightly better?
It's gotten slightly better, but it's not statistically significant. So
my question flows from that.
Mm-hmm.
The question is, did you notice a difference between the genders in actually engaging with those parts of the program that were trying to address the issue of gender attitudes? In other words, did women engage more deeply than men?
Yes, definitely. Women were a lot more deeply engaged through the entire set of modules. It was not just the modules based on sexual and reproductive health or gender, but we did see that women were definitely, young women were a lot more engaged and keen to learn, while the young men were less so. But at the same time, keeping in mind that we had 32 young women's groups, but only 11 groups of boys, young men, participating. But we also realized that it might be too short a time to see. It was only 4 months, and we're looking at really rigid gender structures within the communities, and especially working in communities where women's rights and freedom of movement is quite restricted. We would say that it takes a longer time to actually see a result. We did see a lot of outcome stories linked to gender transformative outcomes. So that was what was interesting, because although I think we were not able to capture the outcomes quantitatively, we definitely did capture them qualitatively. So that's where having both the data collection methods was really helpful for us. Okay, if we can just, yes, Nathan, please.
One more question about engaging the young men in the groups. What learnings were there about how they could be more effectively engaged? Obviously, you touched on a few things like playing sport.
Yeah.
Well, other things that you came across that might be able to engage young men better in the future?
I think more than, of course, there's of course the sports, and we thought of engaging young men in more outdoor activities. We found that young women were happy with indoor activities like chess and ludo and snakes and ladder and things like that, but young men preferred outdoor activities. But at the same time, we are looking at a time when young men were expected to take up informal employment. We are looking at a group that is expected to fulfill a certain role, and that pressure was also a big factor in the outcomes we saw in them. Because over time we saw, although participation was one of the highest we have seen so far, young men tended to drop off towards the end of the program simply because they were expected to go and seek employment.
And secondly, was there any plans to follow up on some subsection of the group, say in 6 months or a year, to see how they're progressing?
That's actually one of the things we are looking at. We are looking at ways to keep engaging with these young people, because we are informally engaging with them. And we have experts by experience groups of young people to guide our project and see what we can do for young people, further. But it's still at an informal phase. We don't have a formal engagement strategy. We're doing it as the teams. And because we have teams within the communities, it's a safe, open space for young people to pop in anytime. And they do pop in and ask questions and need to have a chat, and they just come and seek help from the community health workers.
there additional modules that could be tacked on to the end of this for people who want to get more information, or is this just the main intervention, Nae Disha?
Nae Disha is the main intervention. We don't have any additional modules. We have other modules in Burans targeted at caregivers and financial inclusion modules, but Nae Disha is currently standing alone. So we are hoping to keep young people engaged with more modules, maybe something different. We're not sure what we're looking at yet. In this lull, I was hoping to actually have the young people, the participants of Nae Disha, actually come forward and say a couple of things about their own experiences participating in Nae Disha. Nikita, Sakshi और साक्षी, मैं आप तीनों को यहाँ आगे बुलाना चाहती हूँ ताकि आप बताएं कि आपका सफ़र कैसा रहा नई दिशा के साथ जुड़ के. So I was just asking them to come forward and describe what their journey was like being part of Nae Disha. Whatever they say, I will try my best to translate, capturing the richness of their.
My name is Nikita और मेरे को नई दिशा में ज्वाइन होकर के बहुत अच्छा लगा. मेरे अंदर जो टैलेंट था वो बाहर निकल कर आया. पहले मैं घर में रहती थी तो मैं अपना टैलेंट किसी को दिखा नहीं पाती थी. तो अब जब मैं नई दिशा में ज्वाइन हुई और मेरे को नए लोग मिले वहाँ पर, और उनसे जब मैं मिली तो मैंने अपने टैलेंट को और लोगों को भी दिखाया और उनको बताया कि मेरे अंदर क्या है और मैं कैसे अपना आप को आगे बढ़ा सकती हूँ. तो पहले जब मैं घर में रहती थी तो बाहर नहीं जाती थी और कहीं बहुत सारे लोग होते हैं उनके सामने बोल नहीं पाती थी. तो मेरे अब ज़्यादा लोग रहते हैं तो मैं उनके सामने बोल पाती हूँ. और
मुझे ट्रांसलेट करने दीजिए. I'm sorry, I can't speak Hindi that fast, so I need to translate in between. So Nikita is saying that before she joined Nae Disha, she used to be restricted to her own home and she wouldn't meet people, she wouldn't be able to talk to a lot of people, but through the program she's gained a lot of confidence and is happy to and excited to always present in front of others now. She doesn't have any hesitation to speak in public. And she's also able to exhibit her talents in front of others rather than keeping them hidden at home. Continue.
और जब हम नई दिशा में आए तो हमने वहाँ पर आकर के नए गेम खेले जो हमारे जो चैप्टर थे उसको समझाते हैं, और हमने उसमें सीखा है कि हमारे जो लक्ष्य होते हैं उसको हमें कैसे आगे करके बढ़ाना है. तो हम अपने लेवल को उसी हिसाब से लेकर गए और हम अपने लक्ष्य को आगे बढ़ाया है और आगे भी वैसे ही बढ़ाते रहेंगे. और हम चाहते हैं कि नई दिशा दोबारा से स्टार्ट हो और उसमें नए लोग जुड़ें, क्योंकि हमें और जो हमारे फ्रेंड होते हैं उनके जो भाई बहन रहते हैं वो हमें मिलते हैं तो बोलते हैं हमें भी दोबारा से उसमें ज्वाइन होना है और नई दिशा को स्टार्ट करना है दोबारा से, क्योंकि हमें बहुत अच्छा लगा उसमें आकर के और बहुत कुछ सीखने को मिला. थैंक यू.
Thank you, Nikita. Nikita was saying that that go on for a long time? Okay, never mind. So Nikita was saying that she learned how to set goals for her life and how to actually make smaller goals to reach the larger goal. She also has found a lot of people in the communities, young people and their brothers and sisters who are keen to engage in Nae Disha, and so is requesting that we run Nae Disha in the communities again, keeping in mind the young people who have not been able to participate so far, and she is very happy with the program. Thank you so much, Nikita. आप यहीं खड़े रहिए.
हेलो एवरीवन, माय नेम इज़ साक्षी पांडे. मैं आप सभी को बताना चाहूँगी कि नई दिशा में जुड़ने से पहले, मतलब नई दिशा जो है वो लॉकडाउन से स्टार्ट हुई है, और जब लॉकडाउन था हमारे स्कूल बंद हो गए थे, हमारा ट्यूशन बंद हो गया था. उस दौरान मैं काफ़ी डिप्रेसिव थी. घर में रहकर मुझे कुछ समझ नहीं आता था क्या करना, क्योंकि रूटीन जो है वो कुछ ऐसा हो गया था कि टीवी देखना, बैठना और उससे ज़्यादा और कुछ नहीं. लेकिन उसके बाद मुझे पता चला कि नई दिशा जैसा कोई प्रोग्राम जो है वो चल रहा है, तो मैं इंटरेस्टेड हुई और फिर मैंने फॉर्म भरा और मैं वहाँ की मेंबर बनी. उसके बाद मुझ में जो बदलाव आए वो देखकर मेरी फैमिली भी बहुत खुश थी और काफ़ी अवेयर हुई. तो मुझे पहले गुस्सा बहुत आता था और मैं अपने गुस्से को कंट्रोल नहीं कर पाती थी. मैं खुद को नुकसान पहुंचा लेती थी, चिड़चिड़ी रहती थी, किसी से ढंग से बात नहीं करती थी और मुझे बिल्कुल भी अच्छा फील नहीं होता था. कोई अगर थोड़ा सा भी बोल देता था तो मैं उसे उल्टा जवाब दे देती थी और कई बार तो मैं बहुत घर का सामान भी तोड़ दिया करती थी. लेकिन नई दिशा में आई तो वहाँ एक सेशन था गुस्से को लेकर और उस सेशन में मैंने ऐसा कुछ सीखा, बहुत मतलब अच्छा लगा मुझे जब दीदी ने बताया कि अपने गुस्से को कैसे कंट्रोल करना है। यदि ज़्यादा गुस्सा आता है तो कैसे मैं अपने गुस्से को कंट्रोल करूं, मैं क्या करूं उस समय कि मैं अपने आप को ना नुकसान पहुंचाऊं, ना मैं किसी और को कुछ कहूं और ना ही मैं कुछ उल्टा करूं, मतलब टोटली उसको मैं कंट्रोल कर पाऊं अपने गुस्से को। तो नई दिशा ने मुझे ये सिखाया। और दूसरी बात,
Yes. I'm so sorry for interrupting. Sorry. Sakshi is saying that when the lockdown happened and her routine was completely disrupted, all she would do at home is lie around or watch TV. There was nothing productive or constructive going on. So when the program started, she joined and she learnt a lot about herself. And she also realized that there are tools to cope with anger. So she confessed, or she said that she used to get really angry and she used to cause harm to herself and also break things around the house. But through one of the sessions in Nae Disha, she learned how to control her own anger and how to release that energy perhaps in a different way that would not harm anyone or cause any damage to herself or others.
और उसके बाद कुछ ऐसी चीज़ें भी थी जो हमारे अराउंड थी लेकिन हमें पता नहीं थी। तो मुझे गुड टच और बैड टच के बारे में सच में बिल्कुल भी कुछ नहीं पता था। लेकिन नई दिशा के दौरान मतलब अगर हम कहीं बाहर जाते भी हैं, ज़्यादा हॉक्सपॉच वाला प्लेस होता है, तो वहाँ अगर कुछ गुड टच बैड टच जैसा होता है तो मैं फील नहीं कर पाती थी। मुझे नहीं पता था कि ऐसा कुछ होता है या मेरे साथ ऐसा कुछ, ना मैं अपने पेरेंट्स को बताती थी, मैंने किसी से शेयर ही नहीं किया बिकॉज मैं इसके बारे में जानती ही नहीं थी। शायद अगर जानती होती पहले से तो फील करती और मुझे पता लगता कि शायद मेरे साथ बैड टच हुआ या गुड टच हुआ, क्या हुआ। लेकिन नई दिशा के सेशन ने मुझे ये भी सिखाया कि गुड टच और बैड टच आखिर होता क्या है और कैसी जगह पे किस समय कैसे और हमारे साथ हो जाता है और हमें पता तक नहीं चलता है। तो इसके मतलब ये हो जाता है हमें कैसे एक्शन लेना है। तो मैंने ये भी सीखा। सच में नई दिशा बुरांस, नई दिशा नाम है इस प्रोग्राम का। नई दिशा ने सच में मुझे नई दिशा दिखाया है। मैं हमेशा इसकी थैंकफुल रहूँगी और एक होप रहेगी कि मेरी जैसी और लड़कियां भी जुड़ेंगी और बहुत कुछ सीखेंगी और आपके सामने एक दिन वो भी अपने आप को कन्फेस करेंगी। थैंक यू सो मच।
Thank you, Sakshi. Sakshi was continuing to tell us about how she learnt about good touch and bad touch and how she was unaware of the difference. And especially when going in crowded marketplaces, she was not able to understand the difference between different touches. And the program helped her understand this and also understand how to respond in a situation where she finds herself in trouble. So she's happy that Nae Disha was implemented in the community and hopes that others can benefit from this too in the future. Thank you so much, Sakshi.
My name is Sakshi Kashyap. मुझे नई दिशा को बहुत अच्छा लगा। मेरे में बहुत से बदलाव आया। पहले मैं किसी से खुलकर बात नहीं कर पाती, जो मैं कर सकती हूँ। मुझे किसी के साथ मुझे ये नहीं पता था कि मुझे किससे कैसे बात करनी, बट मुझे एनजीओ ग्रुप में जाकर मुझे बहुत अच्छा लगा। मुझे में बहुत से बदलाव आए। मेरी फैमिली मेरी फीलिंग्स नहीं समझती थी, जो कि बट अब समझने लगी। जब मैं नई दिशा बुरांस में जाती थी तब मेरी फैमिली मुझे जो भी बोलती थी, मतलब मैं समझाती थी अपनी मम्मी को, अपने पापा को बोलती थी कि मुझे ये सब समझाया गया है, तो मेरी फैमिली भी मेरे को वो वैसे ही फील्स करती थी कि मेरी फीलिंग्स समझने लगी है। मुझे पहले किसी से ये नहीं पता था कि मुझे किसी से कैसे बात करनी है, बट अब मैं खुल के बात कर पाती हूँ। पहले मुझे डर लगता था कि मुझसे कोई सवाल पूछता तो मुझे बहुत डर लगता था, बट अब मैं बिल्कुल खुल से बात करती हूँ।
Thank you, Sakshi. Sakshi is saying that one of the biggest struggles she had was to actually express herself in front of others, be it public or just to another person, even in the family. But through Nae Disha and learnings from the program, she actually started going back home and sharing the learnings with her family, and they were quite appreciative of it. And she is also able to publicly talk. Great example here. And she is seeing big changes in her, especially in terms of talking and speaking in public. Thank you so much, Nikita, Sakshi, or Sakshi. I think we can have a round of applause. These are young people who are always in the beginning quite hesitant and shy, and it's really a pleasure to see all of them up here speaking in front of a large, strange crowd. Thank you, Sakshi, Nikita, और Sakshi. हम बहुत खुश हैं कि आप यहाँ आए और हमारे बीच में बात किया आपने. आप जैसे बता रहे थे, आप बहुत झिझकते थे, अब आप झिझक नहीं रहे हैं, वो यहाँ खुला दिख रहा है. So बहुत thank you यहाँ आने के लिए. So, we thought Nae Disha would answer a lot of questions. No, we just have more questions. So, there's one from Karan, okay.
Yeah, but you've already addressed it slightly. How do these findings compare with the 2 previous times Nae Disha was implemented, recognising both of those times achieved significant changes in gender equal attitudes? Why was this different, this situation, compared to the last 2 times it was done?
Okay. So Karan has a question. She's asking what is different in this particular implementation of Nae Disha, which has led to no significant gender equal attitude changes as compared to the previous iterations of Nae Disha that we have had. One major difference between the different types of, different implementations of Nae Disha we have here is that this particular iteration was done in schools and among school-going young people. The previous ones were done among non-school going young people within the communities, and so I think there was also a larger gap to fill. They were starting at a very low baseline to begin with. Perhaps that was not the case with this particular group because they already had some structure to their lives. They were already going to co-ed schools where they were studying with other people of identifying from other genders as well. So that could be one of the reasons why we didn't see that big a difference in gender equal attitudes. Yeah, so we have some questions too, okay. So one thing we have been wondering is, like I think Nathan you also asked earlier, what next? It's something that has been a question for all of our team members as well. As we see young people having increased interest in these programs, we wonder what's next. We are looking for ways to keep the young people engaged in communities after Nae Disha. We're not just dropping them off the deep end once we are done. But we would be happy to hear of any program recommendations that you would have or any schemes that you're aware of. So if you do have anything in mind, any ideas, please do get back to us and we would be more than happy to look into that. And the other question we had is in what ways can we engage with government schools and education department as well to promote uptake of Nae Disha within the state, so within schools across the state. We have had some success in implementing Nae Disha in schools in Yamuna Valley, that's in Uttarkashi, but we want to understand how could we engage with the government bodies better to be able to take up Nae Disha across the state. It's challenging because main cost would be of the facilitator because teachers can't run this program because this is quite a flat horizontal approach. So that is quite participatory, quite different from a classroom setup. So then it comes with its own challenges. So then what can we do? That's the second question we had. And third question I think is partly to Woodstock, I guess, is how can we leverage and work with existing partnerships? So we have a lot of schools we are already partnering with, people we are already in conversation with in advisory groups. So how can we further this network and partnership to increase uptake of Nae Disha in schools in the government sector and perhaps also in other low-income school setups as well? So that's the third question that we're hoping. So if you already have answers to these questions, please. I think we can have this conversation right now, but yeah. And another thought we were having is whether we can possibly adapt the curriculum to more specifically address youth self-harming or suicide as well, because we are covering mental health as a generic topic and we're looking at resilience in general. Can we specifically address suicide? And we have modules on coping with disappointment, but can we add more focus? Can we have a bigger conversation? Can we include education systems and parents in this conversation? So how could this group that we've met here, how could we support this conversation to promote participation, to attain this goal of perhaps reducing youth suicide or self-harm? So these were some of the questions that we had. If you have any other questions or any comments on these questions, right now, I think we have some time. Yes.
So these kids said that Nae Disha, they want Nae Disha to open again. So is it closed now?
Yes, our 4-month facilitation of the modules is completed. We haven't done this again after that. So it's a 4-month program. We have 18 modules. So once we finish modules with the young people, then that's it, except informal engagement with the young people. Then we'll have to run Nae Disha all over again and go through the process of recruitment all over again to be able to run Nae Disha again. It's not a class as such, it's a group program. So
These kids who are attached with you for 4 months, after that there is no interaction, no formal?
There is no formal engagement, but each of the teams informally is in touch with all the young people in the communities.
So the facilitators are still available at
Yes,
place,
yes.
people can come freely and...
Yes, that's correct. Because we are, the target area is our Buran's mental health program target area as well. So we have these sub-centers. These are our counseling centers within the community, which is where some of the groups were also running. So we have that little safe space in the communities where young people can approach. And the facilitators were the community health-based, community-based healthcare workers.
Are you planning any new program for those who have already passed or completed these 4 months?
That is what we are hoping to discuss. We are hoping to design a new program, perhaps maybe based on sports inclusion or something that would keep young people engaged and also increase inclusion within the communities, and also work a lot more on the gender equal attitudes as well within the communities.
Because I feel the data you have collected, it takes a lot of time and energy to collect all those data from
Yeah, definitely.
those many people. So
Yes.
if you are continuously, if you are in touch with them,
Yes, we are.
that data can improve over the period.
Yeah, because the program ended, almost 1.5 years ago, but we are still in touch with the young people, and therefore they remember it enough to actually come up here and speak. So I think that itself is a testament to how effective it was for them. Any other comments or questions?
Right. So,
Yeah.
thank you for the beautiful presentation, Pooja and Nathan. And I belong to Oak Grove School, which is a government school, and I'll be responding a bit to the third question that you asked.
Yeah.
And my question was partially asked by the person gentleman who just asked the question. It was about the module and the time duration of the module that you engage the kids with. And since you answered that it's a 4-month program,
Yes.
and 18 modules are included.
Correct.
So, right, we are a residential school, and we are working with the strata that is lower middle class and middle class of the society, compared to real women. The wards, the parents of whom work on tracks, work on clerical basis, or work as technicians in workshops.
Right.
So, I was wondering whether they might be facing the issues that you just discussed, and we are simply unaware of that. Right? So, because still, in the tea break we were talking that it's still these kind of mental issues are a taboo in our country, right?
Definitely, yes.
These things are equivalent to talking about madness, right? To spell it out in very crude terms. So I was really wondering how to engage with you, Lance and Nae Disha, and how to implement it with your team, so that we can maybe have a...
Yes, we're more than happy to further that conversation, I think, because we are looking at sharing this with as many people as possible. So I think we can talk later to figure out something that will work for.
Sure.
Yeah.
On the same comment, are elements or modules able to be used independently of the whole program? If one school wants to focus on 2 or 3 modules that are more relevant for their kids, is that possible, or done as a whole typically?
Typically, it's done as a whole because, as I mentioned, the topics are increasingly confrontational. We're looking at sexual and reproductive health. We're looking at talking about gender equality and bullying. These are quite confronting topics. So there needs to be some level of relationship built and some trust built for young people to be able to share openly. So like you were saying, taboo, right? So if there is no trust built, they would probably not feel confident to share confidential information. And it takes time to sort of get to that point, which is why the first few sessions are quite light and not too confrontational. So I would personally think it's best to have the whole thing running like all 18 sessions. It could be done over 6 months as well. Like we did sessions once a week. You could even do once in 2 weeks. I mean, I would say at least once in 2 weeks. Yeah, I think that would be ideal.
So have you engaged with any of the schools yet, or have you run the programs with any of the schools?
Not Nae Disha, that we were trying to. We had actually built some networks in Dehradun to actually run Nae Disha in schools. That's when the lockdown hit and we just couldn't do much after that. And even afterwards, when we approached schools for running Nae Disha afterwards, naturally there was so much backlog and so many things to catch up on after the pandemic. It was quite difficult to make any headway in that direction. So which is why we want to see if we can have a larger conversation rather than targeting single schools, to see if this could be taken up across the state rather than, you know, school by school.
In small schools, in quite small community-based schools here, is it something that a teacher, limited teachers, 3 or 4 teachers, is it something that a teacher could take and use, or it's more benefit to have an external facilitator which is more independent from the school?
Yeah, I think definitely beneficial to have an independent facilitator. Again, because we are dealing, it's the same reason why we need to have a counselor in a school who is separate from the teaching staff. You are sharing difficult topics, you're sharing difficult details about your personal life, which hopefully does not color the teacher's impression of the student. I mean, you cannot help feeling bias. It's human nature, it's human tendency to feel that. So having an independent facilitator removes that element of bias and also increases a certain level of confidentiality in conversations as well. Yes.
Two things. To make this much more sustainable in our schools for children with low-income families, right? You've noticed that, especially in government schools, that they are just sort of barely meeting resources that they need for educational needs, right?
Mm-hmm.
So to create a happy, secure environment, there's no sort of research being fed it, and as such there are no policies. So they don't have anti-bullying policies, they don't have any policies.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if Nae Disha could, for a future project, take this on.
Yeah.
That help, through your research, through your experience, help make policies for government schools in the district, in the area.
Yeah.
That was one. And the second thing was, agreed that outside people coming and serving the students, etc., creates a non-threatening sort of an environment.
Yeah.
I think a more sustainable model would be to actually hold workshops for the teachers, because those are the workshops that they miss out on.
Yeah. So, so talking about the first thing, you were talking about how we can affect policies in schools, especially policies that don't exist, right? So one of the goals of this particular iteration of Nae Disha, actually running it in schools, was to hopefully be able to influence policies in some way within the school structure. But again, because of the pandemic, that very key networking was lacking, simply because schools weren't open. And after the pandemic, after the lockdown lifted also, there was pretty difficult situation for the schools as well with time. So we are hoping in the next year to build networks within the schools, especially in the schools young people are currently going to see if we can work together and build some policies, especially anti-bullying, child protection, and also talking about the existing laws, POCSO Act and things like that. We are hoping to network with schools for that. And your second question, like the second topic about sustainability. One issue we faced in Dehradun is that the number of students in one class is really big. So, like you said, limited number of staff as well. And we wouldn't recommend running the program with more than 18 people in a group, right? Because you just cannot facilitate and have conversations with each and every one being engaged in the sessions. So that way, it would be difficult for teachers to implement this with their classroom. just the logistics of it is crazy. Like, you cannot run sessions with 18 young people when there are about 60 people in one class. That becomes challenging as well. And that's where having an external team, or a team, even if it's an internal team but dedicated to a youth resilience program, would be perhaps beneficial. It's, of course, that's a dream scenario. That's like an ideal scenario, but we do recognize the severe challenges on the way to getting there. Yes.
So here at Dissemination, I'm the head of personal counseling here. So here at Dissemination, we have a personal, social, emotional health education curriculum that runs the whole year, from grades ECP to up based on the age we teach all those things. But I would be happy to incorporate some of the modules to our curriculum and just to modify based on our requirements.
Yeah, that's really great. And our resources are available on our website, burans.org. It's there in English and in Hindi. It's free to use for anybody who's interested, but we can definitely, I think, have a conversation to see how best we can actually integrate it. And I think we can have a lot of cross-learning as well. I think fresh eyes would never hurt. So.
It's had a comment actually. So before Woodstock, I worked very closely with a lot of NGOs, the Reproductive sector, and the safe children. So I had a question. So you mentioned partnering with the government, you mentioned partnering with schools. Have you thought about civil society partnerships? Like in the sense, like there are bigger NGOs, again it could be clashing objectives, and I understand
Yeah.
implementation is very different. But I know that larger NGOs like Save the Children, there's plan, there's reach, that is doing work, there already is access. And again, it's a very big question, and I know the nitty-gritties aren't that easy, but has Budan also attempted institutional partnerships at that level?
Not at that level. We have smaller networks and partnerships going on within the communities. So I think there are some other education-based NGOs like Astra Foundation. Yeah, so we have worked with them because we do believe that linking people to whatever services are locally available is a great way to move forward, because we can't do everything. Yeah, we are open to collaborations with other NGOs as well, definitely. But we haven't done it so far.
And I haven't seen your website yet. Communication sources was a question. Are a lot, because I know a lot of human interest stories on the ground, which you rightly said cannot be captured quantitatively, but there are stories of change. Right?
Yes, yes.
There are some intense stories of change, only voices to be justice to. Have you just suggested capturing those visually or on Instagram page? Because the power of media sometimes is just way more than just happening.
Yeah.
So, again, I haven't seen the website, so I'm not sure yet, but
Yeah.
Yeah,
we do have an Instagram handle. We are looking at starting a Twitter handle. We are on LinkedIn. We also have an informal group on Facebook. It's just not running as efficiently as a group that has a social media person, because some of us are doing everything. So, yeah. Yeah. Yes, yes, yes. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Yes, yes. I would be more than happy to take some references from you to sort of communicate with them as well. Yeah. Thank you. Any other questions? Nothing? Okay. Okay. All right, Nathan. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Pooja, for that excellent presentation and for facilitating the questions so well as well. And just to thank Karen Matthias, who has not been able to be here today, but she's also honorary at Melbourne University as well, so it's been great having her as part of our team. But we acknowledge her role in bringing all this to fruition, and hopefully we'll have her back here soon. I was going to ask Michael Wesley to come and give some brief comments and reflections on the dissemination and acknowledge the Chancellor International's support for this project right through the last 2 years, and acknowledge their flexibility as well. We went back and forth with Ashok, who's the Deputy Vice Chancellor International for India, about adapting our program, and it was a very complicated time during the pandemic, and we appreciate the flexibility of Melbourne University. So thank you, Michael.
Thanks, Nathan, and thanks to you, Pooja. What a wonderful presentation it was. I read the report on the plane on the way over and was deeply inspired by it. I also want to thank Nikita, Sakshi and Sashi for your really inspiring stories. There was something about you explaining your own experiences and what you got out of it that really brought the report alive. Pooja, I don't know if you want to translate what I just said for the girls.
Oh, okay. Pooja's already managed that.
Okay. Thank you. What it does really bring out is how wonderful it is to have inspiring pieces of work such as the work that you've led. I'm incredibly proud that we at the University of Melbourne could contribute in a small way to this project. It also demonstrates, I think, the ongoing problems of social marginalisation, gender discrimination and violence, and increasing inequalities, structural inequalities and increasing inequalities. And the fact that our young people are acculturated into all of these things as they grow up. And what an enormous task we have, because these young people are the future of our societies, they're the future of our world. And so in a really small, targeted but highly scientific way, I think you've demonstrated the way forward. But I think in the conversation we were getting to the real challenge, and that is, how do you scale it? How do you take a high quality, focused program and reach a society of 1.2 billion people? And it's not just India. Australia has these deep problems as well. We at the University of Melbourne are struggling with these problems, as is the entire Australian society. So that's the challenge, and I think what I'm inspired by is the creativity of the program. Obviously the minds that are behind this program are of the calibre that can answer some of these questions. So I will be watching Nae Disha in the future. I have no doubt that there will be Nae Disha 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, each one building on the last one. And I think, Pooja, with leadership like yours and Karen's as well, it will go from strength to strength and full strength to your arm. And I hope to continue reading wonderfully uplifting reports like the one I read on the plane. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. Michael is the Deputy Vice-Chancellor of International for the University of Melbourne. He's had to manage a lot of mental health issues, I guess, amongst many students internationally that were stuck in Australia or had their studies disrupted. And Michael's done a great job at the University of Melbourne in trying to respond to those needs locally. A number of those students were from India as well, so he understands the context of some of the disruptions and the mental health issues that have occurred because of the disruptions in the last 2 years. And I guess we want to bring it to a close right now, but I might invite, is it Jamie to come back and just finish up with the program, or do you want me to finish it here? Oh, sorry, Sanjaya. Thank you, Sanjaya.
Sure. Thank you all for coming here this afternoon. I want to, as an advisor on the advisory board for Nae Disha, want to say thank you to Woodstock for allowing us to hold this very important event here. It just has encouraged the entire team, if I may speak on behalf of the team, just encouragement and your ongoing support too. I thank those who've come this afternoon, especially taken time off. I'm looking at the principals and also Mr. Kamoj Sharma. And it's great to have Mr. Kamoj Sharma here because he's the cluster resource coordinator for the education department for our city. And I'm sure he's going to take what he's heard and we can work directly with him. Thank you for being here. And then on behalf of Woodstock School, I want to say thank you very much, Pooja. Thank you to the entire Nae Disha team. It's collaborations like this at the end of the day that really bring life, meaning to life. Yeah. One of the goals for Woodstock School is to nurture students who are responsible citizens. And when we have relationships such as these, and when our students are able to participate in such collaborations, that starts happening naturally. So thank you, and thank you all for being here. You're dismissed. Like we tell the students, you're dismissed.
Now.